Intermittent fasting. You've heard about it as this weird fad or diet craze. Jack Dorsey, the Twitter guy, does it. It's super hip, super trendy, but what is it, and is it actually good for you? Or is it potentially harmful to your health? The answer is that it depends. I want to go over the 3 mistakes that I made when I first started doing intermittent fasting about 10 years ago. And then I want to offer some ways to avoid that while expanding your ability to safely fast for longer and longer periods of time. So first, a story. I learned about intermittent fasting, I think it was about 10 years ago, from a podcast featuring Art Devaney. This guy's the godfather of the paleo movement, and he was in better shape at age 75 than I was as a 20-year-old. And he did this by doing exercise in these short bursts of activity and also eating fewer meals. Not fewer calories, but fewer meals. That's the important part. So the intermittent part of intermittent fasting means that you restrict your food intake to just a couple of hours in the day. And that could just mean eating dinner only, or it could mean skipping breakfast. And that gives you that window of 16 to 24 hours where your body is able to kind of break down a lot of the stuff that accumulates over time. So there's this word that Art Devaney talked about called autophagy, which means that your cells are literally eating parts of themselves. Not the healthy tissue, just the old junk, which they recycle to make new energy from those excess proteins and organelles that accumulate within the cell. So I thought I'd give it a try, but I've got to be honest, I was pretty pathetic at the time. I couldn't even make it to lunchtime without guzzling down 2-3 cups of coffee. So the first mistake that I made that I think is common is over-consuming caffeine and other stimulants. So it might make it easier temporarily, but what goes up must come down, and if you're artificially suppressing your hunger, that's going to come back with a vengeance when the fast is over. Not to mention the possibility of something called adrenal fatigue, where you produce too much adrenaline and it's not pretty. You don't want to end up there. And this mistake naturally sort of leads into the next mistake, which is what I call intermittent gluttony. So intermittent fasting, the flip side is at the end, I would make it to dinner time without eating for the whole day, but by that point I was so hungry and my willpower was so weakened that I would just indulge from dinner time all the way to bedtime, maybe midnight. And that 6 hours of eating everything, the cheap carbs, the almond butters, regular butter, buttering my bacon, all kinds of crazy stuff. Just disgusting. You really don't want to know. Then I'd be full the next morning and I'd do it again. So that leads to the third mistake, chronic fasting. Basically, you're putting your body in a constant state of excessive stress. And here I think it's helpful to think about the hormesis curve, where we have this biphasic relationship where initially, on some interval, stress is beneficial. So up here, we've got the positive range, but then at a certain point, it dips down into harmful territory or toxic territory. And of course, eventually, if we don't eat for too much time, we die. So what should we do instead? Well, the first thing, avoiding stimulants, I recommend some sort of prayer or meditation where you're really embracing the weakness and recasting it in your mind, that feeling of sort of spiritual poverty, as something that's actually making you stronger. Find other nourishing sources of energy, whether it's taking a walk outside in the sun, reading a good book, or just immersing yourself in whatever the task is at hand. Second, when it comes to this problem of intermittent gluttony, there are some protocols that you can use that don't involve cutting out all food altogether, but just restricting one macronutrient group. So the most famous of these is the ketogenic diet, which you can do cyclically, just taking a couple of days where you severely limit your carbohydrates, you bump up your fat intake, and you keep protein more or less stable in the moderate range. What this does is increases insulin sensitivity, which helps your cells perform in that mode where they're burning fat rather than being inclined to sort of open up and absorb the excess glucose in your bloodstream from eating carbs. So this is the cyclical ketogenic protocol, and it's great for trying to lose weight, or if you're diabetic, you can improve your insulin sensitivity that way. The other one, which I think is less known but should be more popular, is the periodic protein fast, which came to me by way of a programmer named Josh Whiten, kind of a biohacker guy. Very smart, very wise, and he recommends restricting protein for 24 to 48 hours where you're only consuming carbohydrates and fat. And this still gives you a lot of options to deal with your hunger. You can have, heavy cream in your tea or coffee, but you want to be staying away from meat, anything with protein, whether that's dairy, cheese, and this will also trigger the autophagy that I talked about without giving you that intense hunger. So cyclical, ketogenic, and periodic protein fast are ways to avoid this problem of intermittent gluttony, especially when you're new to fasting. And then my third suggestion to deal with this problem of chronic fasting is to mix it up. So eat when you're hungry, and occasionally maybe go a full day without eating, or go from dinner one night to dinner the next night. And as you get more experience with this, you'll be able to go longer and longer, this sort of expansion of the hormetic curve. I do a longer fast about once a year where I might go 2 or 3 days, and with that it's just important that you have a way to replenish your electrolytes during the fast. I like to just eat some salt crystals, sea salt, and that when you finish it, you taper off gradually. You don't go straight to a beer and a cheeseburger. You have something light like fruit. So that's intermittent fasting in a nutshell. And if you're interested in more ways to get stronger gradually, sign up for my newsletter for a sneak peek at a new book that's coming out soon called Hormetics. It's all about building this mindset around resilience and learning some of these hacks, much needed in these times of uncertainty, to become more resilient in the actions that you take and also more connected with nature and the elements. So learn the principles and get the actions that will eventually become second nature to you. Check it out.